Ooh. I don't see it yet.
I'd like to start off by singing the 1877 Cars for Kids jingle.
I don't know. I'm not familiar with it. I've never heard it.
My favorite is the attempted remix update version of it, which is just as dreadful.
You want to record it or go with a new song? No, we'll just remix it. It's fine.
Okay. Okay. You in business?
I'm all set. You all set?
I'm in business. Yeah,
all right, man.
In business. All right.
Let's do it.
We're glad you're with us here for another Epiphanous Brad and Britt cast. We do these in the 1:30 to about 2:30 hour Eastern time as we do them. And this will be our only Brad and Britt cast this week due to a death in the family. A death in the family of Britt. Okay.
It's my aunt. Yes, my aunt has passed away. My mother's sister. And it was cancer. For those of you who had to deal with cancer in your lives, it's very difficult. And I'm just glad that she's not suffering anymore. So, yeah, this will be the only one we have this week.
So the only suffering now will be of folks who are watching or listening to us.
That'll be it.
Right?
That's right. That is temporary as well.
That's about it. Okay. All right. Where do you want to start with? President Poopy Pants or?
Well, now you suffered through some of this on Saturday night as President Trump, former president, making his way to Greenville, North Carolina to address the state Republicans. I unfortunately didn't catch any of it. And then the controversy yesterday and on social media has been either that he was wearing Depends or his pants are on backwards. Give us an update of this important story, Brad.
Well, I have to admit, I hadn't noticed anything any more dreadful about Trump than I was used to for the last 6 years in at least watching him, except that he, of course, looked tired and sweaty, kind of even more so because he's older and, he's fading right in front of our eyes. There's no question about it. He is even more unskilled at reading off of a teleprompter. He mangles his words even more, and he now isn't even as good at covering them up. He had that way of when he would mispronounce something, he would act as if he didn't mispronounce the word and then say the right word, and you were supposed to ignore the fact that he didn't know the right word. Okay. So he did that a whole bunch of times.
So there's no question in your mind that the cognitive impairments that had kind of hounded it, they've accelerated since he left office?
Right. Well, of course. It's not a discussion point. It just is. And I know what the answer to that is. What about Joe Biden? Well, what about Joe Biden? Seems to be doing just fine as far as I can tell.
Sure.
And is Joe Biden as crisp and sharp a speaker as he was when he was 45? The answer is no, but that's not the only measure. It's what they're saying. It's the intonation. It's the understanding that that they're understanding what they're saying. And Trump, who has never been able to hold a coherent thought and express it in speech for more than 25 or 30 seconds without flitting off into some other area, he gets worse and worse at that all the time. And he is even less disciplined, if that's possible, than he's ever been. Between reading the teleprompter, going back and forth with his head, you can see him reading it, and then deciding, I'm just way more brilliant than that shit that's written for me. So here I go, zoom off into the wild blue yonder. I mean, all the tics, all the tendencies, they were all there. He must have played the sir, blah, 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 said this to me. A man came up and said, sir. He did a bunch of sir stories, which we've already documented. Everyone, that every time he's ever done that, it's always a fabricated story out of no. There is no one who kept saying sir.
No.
It doesn't work that
well
way.
I mean, and also, like, when he was president, it would be like he would go out to some natural disaster or somebody. He acts like today he's out at Walgreens picking up some eye drops, and somebody just stops him and says, sir, I wish you were back
Sir,
in office.
bro.
Or because that's what he's doing. He said it over to Publix. He's looking through the grapefruits, and somebody just taps him on the shoulder. That's Donald Trump's life, right?
You know, and he's got this limited number of stories, of course,
right?
And he's got now even a limited number of grievances, because some of them he's probably now already forgotten. But he definitely will not give up the story of walking down the ramp and being unfairly attacked for tiptoeing his way down. Was it at a service academy where he's giving a graduation speech, something like that? And of course, he had to spend several minutes being still annoyed over that. And what about Joe Biden walking up the stairs? How come nobody says it's all the same shit? So there really is nothing new. Of course, all the rallies before the election are now slightly different. And I'll call this a rally, although it was not really a rally, but it was kind of flat. Not a lot of audience reaction most of the time. But of course, he couldn't complain about the actual outcome of the election before the election. He just pre-complained about what would happen if he were not to win said election. So now we're on the other side of it, and he keeps it up, and he keeps going there. And doesn't get a lot of reaction, even inside a room full of Republicans in North Carolina. They kind of, okay, keep going. And then he telegraphed that he was going to let you know, and this was the NBC Apprentice brilliant showman tease that he's so good at. Oh, I'm going to tell you next week. You'll find out, right? And we all used to just laugh at it because it was just so transparent. But it works. He got elected. And at the beginning of his speech, he was going to tell us who he was going to endorse for the U.S. Senate Republican nomination. And I'm not going to tell you till the end. Well, that only lasted about 10 minutes. He is that kid. And there's that famous psychology experiment where the child sits at a table and they put 2 marshmallows in front of him, I think, and they say, don't eat those 2 marshmallows. If you can wait 10 minutes or something, I think there's a time limit, we'll give you 5 more or something like that. And it's a test of a child's ability to have the cognitive judgment to give up something right now to get something more in the future. And just like Trump, even when he teases something that he knows you want to hear, he can't wait. So he, bam, goes right into it, right at the beginning of the speech. And he starts pointing out Republicans standing there or sitting there in the audience. Will stand up. And then Laura Trump, who wanted you to know that, she's one of us. She's from Wilmington, North Carolina. She's a pirate. I'm not a Tar Heel. I'm a pirate. Just want to punch her. And she says, I'm not going to run. I'm out. I'm not in. And then Trump announces that he's endorsing Ted Budd, the congressman who used to be my congressman.
Yeah.
Till in the last round of redistricting, he got moved away. He's
For
not
people who don't know, who might be listening or watching, and they don't know much about Ted Budd, which would be pretty easy. Can you give us a little flavor of that guy?
Well, Ted Budd is a guy who was never in politics. I think it was like 3 terms ago, 6 years ago, I think. He ran in a primary. Somebody talked him into it. I think his old man has a lot of money or some influence in the Republican Party. And there was like an 18-person Republican primary, right? It's one of those ones where if you're not a wonk and you walk in and you're voting in a primary, which theoretically you should be a wonk if you vote in a primary, kind of more so than general election voters. But okay, there's 18 names on there. And he got the institutional support in addition to having more money than all the other candidates. So he won the primary, and it was a gerrymandered district, and he won the seat.
The gentleman owns a gun store. That was part of his bona fides in the Republican field.
Wait, hang on. Don't undersell that. It's a gun store and a firing range.
Well, there you go. Right. He's got both. So he's a successful businessman, and that helped him with his bona fides, if you will, in the Republican primary. Right.
And I do believe somebody killed somebody at that place.
I think so too.
There was a big story about that, which of course, because we're so fair, we immediately blame Ted Budd. We just blamed him.
So as a legislator, when he made it to the House of Representatives, Brad, how did he differentiate himself and distinguish himself in representing you, for example?
I have no idea.
Not at all. He was a backbencher. He did shit. He did nothing. He fundraised. He sat in the back. He didn't sponsor anything. He didn't introduce any bills. He just hung on.
No, you're underselling it. He's a backbencher behind the backbenchers.
That's right.
He's in the standing room only behind the backbenchers.
This is how he distinguished himself and caught the obvious attention of Donald Trump. And Donald Trump goes, "Oh, that's the guy. That's your boy right there in the Senate race. You got to have this guy who did absolutely zero when he was in the House of Representatives."
But the fun part of this is post that endorsement to watch the other two announced candidates for the Republican nomination for Senate in North Carolina. That would be Mark Walker, a also former congressman
who did nothing, who also represented this area.
He didn't run in 2020.
Yeah.
Because again, the lines were redrawn more fairly where we live. They were actually drawn more fairly.
Right.
He would argue that they were drawn unfairly against him and the Democrat was going to automatically win. So he quit, he got out. And now we have a Democratic congressperson representing us where we live, Kathy Manning. And so he says, I'm going to sit this one out. And here he comes. I want to be a senator. And boy, he's got some personal problems in his family too, right? His
Walker?
Son.
Oh, it's
holy
unfortunate.
Shit.
Very sad.
Oh my God. We feel, it's almost Hunter Biden-ish in its own way. That this
we had we used to in these parts we used to have a sheriff, and he was very much the kingmaker in local Republican offices, and that was like the last blessing he gave to kind of push this Mark Walker guy, who never would have gotten past the finish line himself because he was just a moron and a simpleton. But this sheriff laid hands on him. This sheriff is no longer in office, and he's the mayor of a small town around here. But that was the last parting gift of B.J. Barnes, really, as a Republican kingmaker in these parts, was Mark Walker, who turned out to be a do-nothing, know-nothing, as we say, backbencher, behind the backbench kind of congressman when he went to Washington.
Mm-hmm.
And the other guy who's having a problem with this endorsement will be Pat McCrory, who was a horrific governor of the state of North Carolina.
Right, but apparently both of these guys, their big complaint is that they really are more Trumpy.
Yeah.
And were more in the tank for Trump and have been than Ted Budd ever was. That's their complaint. So for those of us on the outside of this, and we're not Republicans, we don't vote in Republican primaries, so we don't have a horse in this race. Really?
Well, surely this means
it's really kind of fun. I think this is what is going to go on all over the country.
Oh,
in all these districts where or this is a Senate. This is not just a congressional district.
Oh no, it's a statewide race. So yeah, this would tell you that I think Laura Trump is not running. He wouldn't endorse another candidate if he thought for any reason at all Laura Trump would be running. So that's not happening.
Right. But that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the fact that everywhere across the country, would be Republican Senate nominee candidates in either open seats or where they're trying to knock off a Democrat and the incumbent isn't running. They're in a contest to be the biggest Donald Trump suck up, even though numerically speaking, it doesn't seem like it's a good long-term plan. But I guess long-term is 2023. All they care about is 2022, and they think that there's still enough juice and there's still enough excitement around being able to say Donald Trump endorsed me. Donald Trump, the guy who essentially led an insurrection against the government of the United States, that's the guy who I'm behind, and that's the guy who inspires me to want to be your U.S. senator or your representative or your state house representative or your state senator or your county sheriff. Everybody loves Trump, right? Okay. If we could be wrong and we could be living in a non-democratic United States of America within a few years where they have blocked all attempts at making it fair to vote. All these voter suppression laws across the country go into place, and just enough percentage points are shaved off around the edges that the laws actually perform as they want them to. Although, I guess at one level, we have seen where these laws don't necessarily do what Republicans want them to do when they enact them. They don't work the way they want to. And the Democratic backlash and the Democratic motivation against these laws and the Democratic turnout is spectacular if you combine, and we saw it in the state of Georgia. It did happen. When you combine the idiocy of a Trump endorsement and attempted voter suppression, you know what that does? It gets people mad. It gets them angry, and they go out to vote. And I don't know if it's going to sell in 2022. We will see. I don't think we should just sit back and go, well, automatically the opposite party of the president in power always gains. This we're not in normal times. Nothing is as it was and is likely to be in the future. You can't depend on that. So let them try, because that wheels us right around to the senator from West Virginia, Joe Manchin, who I believe it's a fair criticism right now to say that Joe Manchin cares more about the antiquated, not even in the Constitution, blocking method of filibustering legislation by forcing it to get 60 votes instead of a majority, that he is more interested in preserving that antiquity, which has been used. I know both sides have used it. Shut up. That's not the point. Has been used in some of the most horrible moments in American legislative history, and is now responsible for blocking the possibility of voting rights legislation and everything else that doesn't have to do with budgetary issues. That's the only kind of issues you can do that reconciliation, where you just need 50+1. But other stuff has to have 60 votes to get through. And Manchin is such a phony. I'll tell you why Manchin is such a phony. And this was pointed out by Jennifer Rubin of the Washington Post, or as the lefty websites like to say, conservative columnist turns on Manchin.
Right.
Well, she's a conservative, kind of in the same way that George Will was a conservative, but he was never a Trumper. I mean, you can be a conservative and never be a Trumper. She's a conservative, maybe in the same way that Liz Cheney is. So what? Doesn't matter. If you're saying the right things, you're saying the right things right now. Jennifer Rubin is smart, also a lawyer. but she would like you to know that Mr. Principal, Joe Manchin, who is so worried that if there isn't at least enough Republican support for voter rights legislation, HB 1 or Senate Bill 1, House Bill 1, which is the For the People Act, right? Which will go after gerrymandering and these stupid voter suppression laws and all kinds of things, would knock them out. It would be a federal control over states pulling this bullshit is basically what it would do. That he is so worried that if one of the 10 of these idiot, phony Republican senators, and there's already about 6 or 7 of them that would, but they can't get those final 3 or 4, right? Can't do it.
Right.
If they don't get that support, then the legislation is worthless. It's going to be perceived as unfair. So let me get this straight. When you're trying to do something that will save the election system, save democracy itself, it's more important to get 10 members of a political party, now a cult, who are completely enthralled and bowing down to one person, Donald Trump, that you want their blessing, and that the United States of America itself, not just your fucking backhole piece of shit state, West Virginia, which you say you represent. Well, guess what? When you're a U.S. senator, you're a U.S. senator. You're not a West Virginia senator. We don't elect you to the West Virginia Senate. You're getting elected to the United States Senate, and you have national responsibilities, you dope. That if he doesn't get their blessing, then this is all worthless. It wouldn't count. Well, Joe Manchin, when Obamacare came up for a vote, guess what happened? They got 60, I believe they got 60 Democrats. There were just 60, right? They had no margin for error. And you know what you did? You voted with the 60.
You did.
You decided then that Obamacare, which by the way, if you remember the arguments against Obamacare, it was going to be the end of the United States of America. It was going to be ball game over, said the Republicans. This was going to be a big government takeover of healthcare, and our way of life was over. So Joe Manchin of the year 2009 apparently thought that it was important enough for the country to vote for Obamacare. But you don't think it's important enough to vote for the country now to make sure that we have a free and fair election system going forward? That's not equal to Obamacare? I think it is. I think it's even more important. And it's shameful. It's shameful.
Jennifer Rubin writes, Manchin insisted he will not weaken or eliminate the filibuster. He should be compelled to spell out what reforms he would accept. He's requiring Republicans to hold the floor, i.e. demanding a talking filibuster, weakening the rule. It's well past time to pressure Manchin to start answering some basic questions. Manchin's bland platitudes suggest he prefers stalemate to taking hard votes. The status quo leaves him with latitude to make holier-than-thou pronouncements to decry both sides. And I think that's what's frustrating to me, is that he gets to go, these people suck, and these people suck. And it's like it's the equivalence thing. Well, yeah, I mean, you can say about both sides suck, but there's only one side that's holding up the legislation right now, pal, and it's the one that you're supporting.
You gotta make a choice, and you cannot sit there and tell us, well, but I vote with the Democrats, 99.9% of the time, and I think Joe Biden is definitely the man for the job, and he's good. That's great, but that doesn't matter. This is now. This is of this moment, and I think you're failing. I think you're failing. Somewhere, is it possible that somewhere in the back of his mind, he thinks that history is really going to treat him special, that he is going to be elevated to this vaunted position of being the man that stopped, fill in the rest of the sentence. What right. Did he stop?
Everything.
What did he stop? I say, you know what? He's the guy who will be looked at by history, possibly right now, as the man who failed to stop
Mm.
the complete disintegration, the dismemberment of democracy in the United States of America. And he can't even say one of the most horrible cliches ever about the U.S. Senate. I've heard him mangle it several times. One of the most horrible, I don't know who said it, where it first came up, that the U.S. Senate is, I believe it's the oldest or the most treasured, vaunted, impressive debating body in the world. Okay, that the U.S. Senate is this, and he keeps saying it wrong. He says it more wrongly than I just did. And that doesn't help. That doesn't mean anything. There are no deliberations in the U.S. Senate. They discuss nothing, and they get nothing done. I don't think that the founding fathers set up the U.S. Senate to stop everything in its tracks. And you know how I know that? Because they didn't have a filibuster then. They didn't have a supermajority to pass legislation at the beginning of the country, which is pretty amazing when you think about it, because, you know, they bent over backwards in a lot of other areas, you know, to mollify the southern states. But they did not have a 60 vote, or it wouldn't have been 60 back then. The Senate was smaller then, but they didn't have a 50% plus X qualification. I mean, that kind of crap didn't even start, I don't think, till the 1840s, and then it was sparingly used. And the fact now that, you know, there's some statistic like in the last 15 years, the filibuster has been used 280 times, and it's only been used 12 times in the previous 200 years. There's some crazy statistic like that. So you know what that tells you? You got a bad rule. You got something bad going on, really, really bad.
Let's shift to this. Former President Obama is making some speeches now. He had an interview that was published by the Jewish Insider, and you can see the headline there. He blames Trump for a rise in anti-Semitism. We had a president of the White House who fanned those flames. He talks about some of the insurrection, some of those things. Brad, is it appropriate? Is it a good thing? I think it's a good thing that Barack Obama is speaking out about these things, and I think it's fairly obvious to a lot of people that it's not only the rise in anti-Semitism, but these attacks against Asian Americans. All of that seems to be traced back to a lot of Trump's rhetoric and Trump supporters, correct?
I don't even know whether that's discussable.
I don't think it's a controversial statement.
I don't think, no, it's not a controversy. Now, of course, you have to come in from the other side and figure out what will be the Fox News banner at the bottom of the screen that tells this story. You know, it could be Obama falsely accuses Trump of anti-Semitism. You know, they will twist it and you know, a change. In other words, for instance, I went by Fox this morning, and they are obsessed. Their new obsession, and this is, you know, right along with that story, they are completely obsessed with critical race theory being shoved down the throats of every child in America, which, by the way, the fact is, one, it isn't. Number two, there was no massive clamoring to start teaching this anywhere, everywhere. But this is what Fox does. They start to talk about it as if that's happening, and you draw more attention to it. And probably some school systems have said, oh, we maybe need to take another look at it. So they're going to create a problem that they think needs solving. But the banner at the bottom of the screen when they were talking about this story today was reading, writing, and racism. Pretty clever, huh?
That is good.
Yeah.
That's good stuff.
Yeah. And they're going with these stories that black kids are coming home and telling their parents, you know, we're better than them. We're better than white people. And white kids are coming home and telling their parents, why are you such racist, mommy and daddy? Why are you teaching me racism? This country is, which, you know, this is just hysterical horse shit And I feel bad. I don't know whether you do. I feel bad that I was not taught a lot of things about this country that we should know. I did not know, even from a numerical standpoint, that 80 or 90% of the Native American population was wiped out when the settlers first came here. That's how nasty we were to grab this continent. I didn't know that the number was that high.
It was either by by the settlers killing them, or by disease. It was by one of those two methods. Usually, was how that happened.
Right. Well. Of course, as you know, the settlers were telling the Indians they don't need to wear masks. So
that's what it was.
Spread a lot.
That's what it was.
A lot faster. You see what I did there?
Well, they developed a smallpox vaccine, but they told the Indians it was very unsafe and they should just try some hydroxychloroquine. As a therapeutic.
Of course, we didn't know about Tulsa. We didn't
know
about Wilmington, North Carolina, and you're in North Carolina. But a guy wrote a letter to the New York Times, one of the response letters to a story about Tulsa. And he pointed out, and he was writing from North Carolina, and he was writing that the Wilmington coup, what was that, 1898? What year was that?
I think that was 1898.
Yeah. And Wilmington was this prosperous city that was back then. I guess the Republicans, they were black Republicans, and they were the more liberal people of the day, and they ran the city, and it was a prosperous place, and black businesses and black politicians and the rest. And what triggered that? Was that another incident where a black guy looked at a white woman or something like that? What was the official trigger?
It says multiple causes brought it about, is what I'm reading.
Right, multiple causes. But the letter writer wanted you to know, and wanted me to know, wants us all to know, that the difference between Wilmington and Tulsa was that Wilmington was not only as destructive and murderous as what happened in Tulsa, but it also was a political coup. It was a complete wiping out of the political establishment. Tulsa was as horrible as it was, but Wilmington is Tulsa plus a political coup, a political backlash by white people against black people. So I'm not sure, and I don't want to play the how come you're not talking about this game, but I'm shocked that there is not, or that there isn't going to be, or I would anticipate that as much attention and as many movies and as much attention to Wilmington should be paid as what happened in Tulsa.
Easily,
it's because it's actually more comparable to what we have going on today, which is white people who cannot stand the fact that somebody who doesn't look like them is getting a leg up, who is successful, who's navigated the system well. They can't stand it. So get out of our way. Well, we can't do it at the ballot box, so we'll kill you.
Yeah. That's essentially what happened. It was a bunch of white folks who didn't like to see black folks doing well, and they went ahead and decided to march them out of their houses, and in many cases just massacre them and kill them. In Wilmington, it happened down at the bridge. They marched a bunch of them down there, and they just did a mass execution.
And it didn't make the history books.
No,
it didn't make the history books. And I don't want to play comparison games here, which means I'm about to do so. I'm not saying that Rosa Parks refusing to sit at the back of the bus wasn't a big deal. Okay. It was a big deal. But you know what? The massacre of hundreds of black people and a political takeover of a substantial city, that might be a bigger deal. Except if nobody knows about it, it didn't happen.
Also, I think that I think what you're saying is right. You get thrown a couple of bones in history. Here's MLK, here's Rosa Parks, here's Brown versus Board. And I also think that there's also this thing that's just a zeitgeist in American culture. Like, that was the civil rights era. Well, the civil rights era has really been going on for about 300 years, hasn't it? I mean, I think that's fair to say. There's not an era. The struggle's always been around.
Since 1619.
Oh, okay, 400 years. We'll go 400 years, right?
Right. That's the critical race theory. And by the way, a critical race there isn't one thing. It isn't a thing.
But
I think there are a lot of aspects to it.
You'll be glad to know that America's new biggest asshole, Governor DeSantis, is going after hard and heavy in Florida, where a lot of educators, the theory, as many educators, I'm reading from the story in the Miami Herald, is not taught in any Florida school districts. I'm going to repeat that. The theory is not taught in any Florida school districts, according to state officials. Still, DeSantis is repeatedly injecting it into discussions about how teachers should deliver lessons on civics and history, and more than 2 million public school students in Florida. Appearing on Fox News on Saturday night, Governor DeSantis said he would start getting involved in school board races to attack candidates who support the education approach, Brad. He is preemptively not going to let your kids know about Wilmington or Tulsa or any else damn thing, because it's bad, it's liberal, it's way to the left, and it makes white people feel ugly about themselves. He truly is. He's positioning himself. If Donald Trump is dead or in jail in 2024, Ron DeSantis wants the job.
No doubt about it.
I mean, that's the guy. And it becomes, as you said, it's this massive boogeyman that they can just pull up whenever they want to. It's not being taught in the schools. We've got a lieutenant governor here, Mark Robinson, who is,
by the way, what was introduced first. He was the first person introduced by Trump.
He's the darling. He's a darling among the Trumpers in North Carolina. He is the one that he's the watchdog to make sure that none of that leftist bullshit gets taught to your kids in public school in North Carolina. That's what he wants to do. He is poring over everything with a fine-tooth comb so that leftist socialist shit is not taught to your children. And of course, by leftist socialist shit, we mean Tulsa, Wilmington, all of these things that we just talked about. Mark Robinson does not want that stuff. Mark Robinson is an African American.
I think it's more than just a few incidents in history that we haven't learned about. It's the fact that embedded, this is what I understand critical race theory to be, that there is inherent embedded racism into almost every bit of daily life. Certainly in economics, in buying a house. I mean, how many more stories? How many more stories are we going to have to see on the news? And I know you've seen them by now, where a black family wants to move. They want to sell their house.
Right.
They get the house appraised, and the appraisal will be for $110,000. And the black person knows that their house is worth substantially more than that. They might live in a neighborhood with a bunch of other houses. They know 110 is this horror. So they hire a company or a group of people, they're white, who will come in. They take all the pictures of the black family out of there. They get rid of every trace of blackness in the house. And then they call up the appraisal people, and the appraisers come back in, and suddenly the $110,000 appraisal is $240,000. Okay. Because it's a white family. How many times have you seen this story, Britt? How many times?
Many times.
It happens over and over and over again. I mean, that's just a small example of embedded racism in the country. And clearly, again, you and I don't know this from personal experience.
No.
Black folks feel, and I think they have a right to feel, because they know it's true, that they don't get the same kind of medical treatment in the same way that white people do. And by the way, the most egregious, obnoxious example of this is, we talked about this last week, I think, the NFL, the National Football League, America's sport, the number one sport, where when it came time to pay people who have contracted all kinds of PTSD and brain injuries over the years where they've had these settlements, they apparently had a much lower threshold for black players on how much they would pay them.
Right.
Because
their cognitive baseline was determined. Their cognitive baseline
it's
was
just
to be
assumed
lower.
they didn't have that much brain power to have melt away.
Right.
So therefore you get a lower payout because black players are just dumber.
And then just last week the NFL goes, okay, we'll give up the ghost on that one. We'll go ahead. In 2021 they decided, okay, we've heard enough of people bitching about it. We'll go ahead and let that go. Not to be, by the way, just ironic here. The doctor that they killed, the doctor that they destroyed when it came time to kind of come face to face with cognitive impairment issues as it relates to chronic traumatic encephalopathy. What color was that doctor, Brad? Just curious. It's just kind of a thing that just happens. It's a black doctor that gets run out of town on a rail because he's telling the truth about brain injuries.
Are you talking about that guy up in Boston?
Yes, the guy that they made the movie about that Will Smith portrayed in the film. He's written a book about it, and he gets run out of town on a rail because he's trying to note that, hey, these brain injuries that are endemic to the game of football are hurting people permanently, and in some cases killing them. So they run that guy has to be dosed. Get out. They got to get him out of town. You got to destroy his career. Got to destroy his life.
That's a fine idea. That always solves the problem.
And that's precisely what happened. So yeah, I mean, these are just things, and again, that's critical race theory. If you're a black, it's not only what you were talking about with the appraisal of houses, but it's just how many times because of a blinker being not working on somebody's car, are they somehow shot on a traffic stop? How often does that happen? Doesn't happen to black. It happens to black folks way more than it happens to white folks. You're much more likely to be killed by a police officer if you're black than you're for white. These are all things, but again, Ron DeSantis and folks like him and Mark Robinson, they just don't want to talk about that. They don't want that to be taught. They don't want to be a part of any curriculum at all. So it's just unpleasant.
But it kind of gets beyond that because what the political cudgel is on this, and just think of this as it will be played out with unfair political commercials that tell half truths and lie, but it's about telling white people you have nothing to feel guilty about, and all they want to do is make you feel guilty for being white.
It's true.
And so this, again, these things come up, and we try to act as if the idiocy of them as issues compared to what's really important. This can't be a reason that people vote, but we know better.
No, it is.
We know better because in the end, voting is not a political act. It's an emotional act for many people. And it's even more so now since it's owning the libs. It's about going there to punish your enemies.
Absolutely.
And what better way to punish your enemies than those ones who are telling you that you should feel guilty for being white? Okay, letter R next to your name, you got it. So that's what they're doing. And again, this is a distraction because, of course, right now it's more important to protect the rights of people to vote, to not put up more barriers, to get more people to vote. It's like vaccination. We want more people getting vaccinated. No questions. It just damn it, get it done. And you know what? We want more people voting. We don't want to set up barriers.
Well, certain of us want more people voting, don't we?
Well, yeah. You're right. That was an assumption that I made. It was absolutely not true. I'm lumping all of us in together that we all want more people to vote, and we don't want more.
Not everybody.
A lot of people don't. All right.
That's us for this week.
That's it. All right. Well, we're sorry that this will be the one and only for this week, but we will be back on Monday, and our condolences to your family, Britt.
I appreciate it, guys. Thank you so much.
See you